So you've had 12 toddlers. Can you share what you did with toddlers? Maybe you was throwing a tantrum or telling you no.
If your child throws a fit in the grocery store and you give them the candy bar to keep them quiet, then he is being trained to throw a fit until he gets the candy bar. My husband and I grew up in a generation where they spanked 12 different children. They're all different. Some of them you can just look at them crooked and they straighten right up, and others need a little bit more convincing. I know that in the medical profession that they say of children that come in that are very difficult, that they are NBS, never been spanked.
Is it okay to discipline a toddler via spanking? What should a parent do when their child throws a tantrum? Today, I am joined by my special guest, Jennifer Flanders, and she shares a wealth of information on today's episode. I did decide to split this episode into 2 segments because it was so long and so jam-packed with wonderful information for you all. So make sure to click that subscribe button so you can hear both parts of the episode. And now let's dive into this episode with Jennifer. Mentioning your kids, and that made me want to ask more questions, because for so long I've listened to your podcast and I've been like, I just want to just ask you questions about parenting because it's so interesting. I'm sure I was looking at your YouTube and you have these wonderful comments and then these atrocious comments, on your family size, but
Yes.
people, to me it's just so sad because your family's so beautiful. But then when it comes to parenting, I'm sure you have lots of people that want to know, because I'm sure you've had a wide variety of personalities, boys and girls, so I'm sure that, is an asset that a lot of people would like to know more about. So I was curious, I kind of want to go through some of the differences, boys and girls, different ages.
Yes.
But I wondered if you would start, I think a lot of women who listen to this podcast in particular are kind of in the toddler years. And I have tried very hard not to speak. I do think older women are supposed to mentor younger women, teach them how to love their husbands and children. So I'm like, I want to bring someone on to speak about this. So you've had 12 toddlers.
Yes.
And many of them, I don't know all of your children, but it sounds like many of them are growing up to be functional adults who still have a relationship with you. There are no formulas in parenting, but
yes, absolutely.
Can you share maybe just what you did with toddlers, like some basic guidelines? If you had a toddler, maybe you was throwing a tantrum or telling you no or having a meltdown, I'm sure the wide spectrum of toddlerhood. Would you mind just sharing what you did with the knowledge that not every family
are sometimes hard, but the hardest part, and this is what my mom told me, was the hardest part is being consistent, and that is really the need, is to be consistent and make sure that you don't reward the tantrum. Okay, because you're going to get more of what you reward. And so if your child, throws a fit in the grocery store and you're trying to check out and you give them the candy bar to keep them quiet, then he is being trained to throw a fit until he gets the candy bar, So you don't want to reward the tantrum or to placate them into obedience. But I do have to make a caveat here. Let me, I'm wanting to go 2 directions. So let me say one thing and then come back. And like in the grocery store, I would quickly remove myself from the public and take them to the car, even if it meant leaving my cartload of groceries there in the middle of the aisle until I could go and discipline them or talk them through their problem or give them what they needed in in a private area, and then go back, because that way they don't have all this stimulation from people around, and you're not having to deal with the onlookers that all have an opinion about how you're handling the tantrum. And I'll come full circle to this in a minute, because I do have to say one caveat as far as rewarding tantrums. I do understand that sometimes there's extenuating circumstances. I had 3 sons with diabetes, and my first was diagnosed before he was 2 years old. And back then, we had to mix doses of insulin, which means that I had to predict before he ate breakfast in the morning at 2 years old, what he was going to eat at lunchtime and give him the insulin that would not only cover the short acting insulin that would cover breakfast, but also the long acting insulin that would cover lunch 4 or 5 hours later. Okay. Which means that if we got delayed at the grocery store or he decided he didn't want to eat anything for lunch, that his blood sugar could go low really, really fast. And it was a really scary thing because if it got too low, he could go into a coma. He could even die if it got too low. And so, I remember being at the library one time, and at that time, when they have those kind of insulin reactions, what they need is sugar to bring their blood sugar back up. Okay, and if they get so low that they go unconscious, you carry a glucagon pen that you actually give them a shot that will bring their blood sugar up. But they were really expensive. The pens were really expensive, whereas the little sugar tablets that you would give them were inexpensive. And so you really wanted to catch it early enough that you could just treat it with a sugar tablet and bring it back up. So anyway, we were at the library and my oldest flopped on the floor. He was having an insulin reaction, and I recognized it. They get real clammy, and anyway, I knew that that's what was going on, and I was trying to deal with him and carry the books and carry my other three children that were, like by this time he was probably 4 or 5, and I had two others, including a baby, and so I'm trying to hustle everybody to the car and get it. And this man just said, if you just ignore it, he'd stop doing that. Well,
Oh,
yes, that is true for normal tantrums sometimes, but it was not true for mine. He might stop doing it because he might go into a coma and
because he's in a coma.
pass on. Yeah, but
Oh.
but anyway, so you know your child better than the onlookers, and so I would just like remove yourself, handle it in private, and then come back and finish grocery shopping after you've done that. And so anyway, but sometimes I do know that things contribute to tantrums. If your child is overtired, or if they're sick, or if they're having an insulin reaction, I realize that that contributes to tantrums. But you don't want to use that as an excuse. You don't want to say, "Oh, well, you're allowed to have a tantrum because you missed your nap." And you don't want to use it an excuse for your child or for onlookers, either one. You just want to address it. I mean, if they're thirsty, you can give them some water. If they're low, you can give them the sugar to bring them back up. If they need a nap, you can get them home as quickly as you can and put them to bed. But you still have to address the fact that you're throwing a temper tantrum. Sometimes you have to come back, circle back to it after you've addressed the other issue. Like I would bring his blood sugar up and then I'd say, "Hey, you buddy, you cannot like flop on the floor. You need to just let me know I'm low, give me sugar, or, I need a tablet or something like that." And so you kind of walk through that process. And I'm a big fan of practicing the right way to do it after they've done it, or, a better way of handling a situation. Walk through the steps with your kids and practice that. If my child, I call them and they run the other way and they're little, and maybe there's a question in my mind: did they hear me? Are they really just defiantly obeying? Or are they just being young and irresponsible? Then what we do is come back. We're going to practice this because obviously you are having trouble with coming when you're called. So you stand there. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to call, and you come, and we would just run through it. Or if they, grab a toy from their brother and hit him on the head, because they were taking too long, then okay, let's walk through this, and this is how you should handle it, and practice that way. There's lots of tools that you can use. My husband and I grew up in a generation where they spanked, and everybody got spanked, and not just by your parents. You got spanked at school, you got licks, by teachers, babysitters, grandparents, everybody that thought, "Oh boy, that behavior warrants a spanking," would dole it out. And so both he and I were spanked when we were growing up. And my parents, I mean, I can speak to what I grew up with. Um, my parents were really very patient, and there were only a maybe two or three things that warranted a spanking in their mind. And that was if I lied, or if I was cruel to somebody, or I was openly defiant. You know, they told me not to do something and I looked them in the eye and did it anyway. Or they told me to do something and I thumbed my nose and went the other direction and ignored them. You know, so those were those issues. Now, I also had a babysitter for just a short period of my life that she also spanked, and she would spank for just about everything. And when my parents would give me a paddling, I felt um, I felt like they loved me and that they didn't really enjoy that. You know, I didn't feel like they were taking frustration out on me. I felt like they wanted what was best for me and were trying to help me learn. The babysitter would jerk me up by the arm and just spank me in a circle around her as I ran, you know, and I got the impression that she didn't even like children. You know, like to this day, I think, why were you keeping children in your home when you so obviously were irritated by everything they did, you know? And so if I had only experienced that kind of a spanking, um, I don't know that I would have ever felt comfortable using that tool on my own children, you know, out of the toolbox. I probably would have found other ways of disciplining them because she was spanking in anger, and it came across, and that was a bad thing. Uh, but if I had not experienced that and all I had known was the calm and collected way that my parents addressed really serious issues, then I would think, why in the world are people calling this abuse? This really taught me. I didn't have to have very many spankings because I learned really quickly. And I never got them at school, you know, because my parents let me know that if you get in trouble with school and they decide that you need a spanking, you're gonna be in worse trouble when you get home, you know. And so I was pretty compliant. I mean, I was strong-willed in one way, you know. I knew what I believed and was tenacious about things, but I also was respectful of my parents, and I generally did what I was told, and was happy to do so. Um, so I would say I think a lot of people look at that issue, and some of them don't even read what the Bible has to say about it. You know, the Bible does. Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go. When he is old, he will not depart from it. Of course, that doesn't say anything about spanking, but it does talk about training the child in the way that particular child should go. You know, and like you said, 12 different children. They're all different. Some of them you can just look at them crooked and they straighten right up, and others need a little bit more convincing. And then also Proverbs 13:24, a lot of people misquote that. It says, spare the rod, he who spare, you know, you hear spare the rod, spoil a child. That's not what the Bible says. The Bible says he who spares a rod hates his son. And so some people will say, oh, well, that's the rod of discipline. That's like pointing the right way that you should go. That's, you know, that's not talking about spanking. It's talking about leading. But then you see Proverbs 23, 13 and 14. Don't withhold discipline from a child. Although you strike him with a rod, he will not die. Strike him with a rod and you will deliver his soul from Sheol. That does not sound like it's just talking about pointing the right direction, you know. So I know that in some societies, they have outlawed that. And if you try to spank your child, you could get the child taken away. If you are foster parenting, you can't spank. I think it's the I don't know if that's all across everywhere. I haven't ever fostered
Oh,
children. They
really?
won't let
I don't know.
people with 12 of their own children foster. I don't think so. Anyway, that's what I've been told.
Hmm.
So again, that's one tool in the toolbox, but it is an effective tool for certain things like cruelty. Like
Hmm.
you don't want your child to get cruel, to be cruel to others, to be bully. You don't want them to be a bully, and they need to know that that's a serious thing. And lying is very serious. Um, Sometimes you don't know for sure that they're lying. I would pray about that and pray that it would come out real clearly if they're lying. Um, but
But you would spank, and by the way, I was also spanked, and it was similar to how you were, where it's like it was under control. They shared the
yeah,
gospel with me afterward. It was not traumatic, So
no,
I
it
totally
didn't break
understand.
fellowship at all. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
and I think it helped me. So it's like, anyway, and I'm so glad I have you on because none of the young moms will talk about this because
well,
anyways, but I'm like, this is why you have older women to talk about this. But I do think, I just appreciate you being willing to say, like, it's not for every single child in adoption, but it's a tool you used. And many of the children that, it's just something that's not talked about very much, but
yes,
and I do think sometimes people think, how some people think children are innocent, and I'm just like almost certain they don't have children because,
yes,
they say they learn it from their parents, and I'm like, never have I ever bit my husband on the arm, for fun and laughed, or just like some of this stuff. It's like this is, yeah, there is foolishness in the hearts of children. So I appreciate what you're saying about there needs to be a consequence, and it shouldn't be like what
yes,
you were saying. It shouldn't. It's not pleasant. All discipline for the moment isn't
yes,
pleasant,
that's
So
right.
just that
Yeah.
whole,
But
yeah.
we're told not to reject the discipline of the Lord because
Mm,
whom the Lord loves, he reproves just as a father corrects the
mm,
son in whom he delights. The
mm,
the understanding and the assumption is that if you love your child, you're going to correct them. And so whatever form that takes, and again, I don't think that, to the hammer, everything looks like a nail. I don't think
mm,
every infraction deserves a spanking. I don't. I think that there are other ways to handle things, but I also don't think that you should assume that if you don't spank, you will never be guilty of abusing your child in any way because even if you decide that you are only going to talk and reason with your child, there are ways that you can be abusive in your speech. You can be hateful in the what you say to your child. Uh, uh, Time out. There's a difference between having a child sit beside you and calm down and locking the child in the closet. There's a difference between reasoning with a child and shouting obscenities at the child. And there's a difference between calmly saying, okay, bend over. You did exactly what I told you not to do, and you're going to get a lick.
mm,
And then praying and hugging, and we're all happy again than jerking somebody up by the arm and swatting them in a circle. And if that's the only way that you're going to be applying and using that tool, then I would say no, don't use
mm,
that tool. And but by the same token, realize that no matter what kind of discipline you use, and the whole idea is to provide direction and training for your children so that they understand that there are consequences to sin. And this is part of our job as parents to reflect our Heavenly Father who will give consequences for sin. He has already done that by punishing our sin on the cross when his son died in our place. And that was, that was a lot. That was how serious it was. And so we don't want our children to think that hitting and biting and calling awful names and that kind of thing is excusable. We want them to grow up to be responsible, caring, compassionate adults. And I I know that in the medical profession that some people have they say of children that come in that are very difficult, that they are NBS, never been spanked. Oh, we have another NBS patient today. Yeah, because it really does. It shows because there is a huge difference between parents that just let their kids get away with everything and think that it's all a stage that they'll eventually grow out of. Well, guess what? It's the parents' responsibility to help them grow out of those stages, and just ignoring bad behavior rarely makes it go away. It usually gets worse and worse. You don't want to ignore bad behavior. And there's a difference between immaturity. I'm not talking about trying to require from 2-year olds what you would expect from a 10-year-old. I'm just saying age appropriate expectations, and yeah, maybe when they're 2 and they haven't had their nap, they are gonna freak out over the least little things. Well, make sure that you help them get their nap every day and still explain to them, I'm sorry, but even when you're tired, you're not allowed to flop and scream and do what you're doing. So yeah, I that's what I would say
Yeah,
on that.
I really appreciate you being willing to share what you did. I think that's kind of rare on the internet these days. So I really
Well, my,
appreciate that.
my kids are grown now too, so
Yeah, so you can.
when
So
when you're
yeah.
when they're little, you have to be very, very careful. You don't want somebody deciding, oh, you spank, therefore I'm going to call CPS, and you know.
Yeah. Oh, I want to talk to you all day. I see we're. Do you have time for one more question, or should we end
Sure,
it here? I
sure.
can.
I,
I can
I
end
have,
it. Okay.
I have.
Can you just share a little bit, and then we will close about if you parented boys and girls differently at all, or if it was
I'd say
pretty
yes
similar
and
across the
no.
board. Okay.
Yes, in that we have that expectation that our boys are going to grow up to be men, and our women, and dads eventually probably, and that our little girls are going to grow up to be women, and we definitely put that expectation out there, which is not necessarily politically correct today, but that's what the Bible teaches. That He created a male and female. That's what Mister Rogers sang to us when I was growing up. Only girls grow up to be the mommies, and only boys grow up to be the daddies. And it's very much common sense and also scientifically accurate if you're honest. And so, in that sense, we do. I don't buy dresses and ribbons and dressed up my boys. Actually, I didn't do that a lot for my. I mean, the girls wore dresses a lot of times, but not to church on Sunday. But I I I don't know. I would buy them ribbons if that was something that or tie ribbons in their hair or whatever, if that's something they wanted, or paint their nails or something like that. And I would not
You would
be
be
doing that for
willing.
the boys. Yeah, but and princess dresses for the girls, and knights and armor and for the boys, and yeah, so in that sense, yes, a little bit, but in the sense of trying to attach a sex to different, a gender to different chores and stuff? No, because I grew up. My dad was a contractor, and so I learned how to do all sorts of things. And so I'm good at household repairs, and I'm the one that pulls the toilet if the toddler flushes something that gets stuck, or I'm the one that changes out the light switch when it goes, because I learned that growing up, and I think it's valuable that I know that, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with women knowing how to change spark plugs or pump gas into a car or anything like that.
Yeah.
I took wood shop and welding when I was in junior high, because I think that there's value in knowing different skills, and I would teach my girls all of those things too, and my boys. And then, in fact, just a couple of weeks. Oh, when we went to Louisiana. Just my husband and I went to Louisiana a couple of weeks ago because he had some continuing medical education classes while we were there, and the lights inside our refrigerator went out while we were gone. So you'd open the refrigerator and it was dark. You could barely see what was on the bottom shelves. And my daughter figured out what parts she needed to order and ordered them. And they didn't arrive before we made it home. She was hoping they would, because it went out when she opened the door and she felt like it was her fault, which that definitely not the case. But anyway, she ordered the part and she changed the lights on her own. She just figured out how to do that. So I am so happy about that. But anyway, I think that all of the boys and the girls should learn how to do basic things like that. And I certainly don't just give girls the washing of the dishes or the baking of the pies. My boys are really good cooks, and some of them really enjoy cooking, and all of them are able to cook. Same for they like, some of the boys like to sew. They make elaborate stuff. My girls like to sew too, So anyway, so in the sense that I don't attach different pastimes and stuff to, oh, this is only for girls, or, oh, this is only for boys. I don't do that. But, as far as dreaming of the future, I certainly don't cast a vision for my boys to be moms, or, the girls to be boys. That is ridiculous. So that's not what I do.
That's good. That sounds very balanced, because I do think sometimes it could swing the opposite direction, where girls only cook, and and then if a boy's interested in cooking, suddenly he's confused. Like, it's, especially in our culture, that can be even more confusing. It's like,
yes,
it's not masculine interest.
No, it's not exactly. So
very balanced and helpful. I
you
can talk to
have
you all
a
day.
few more questions, so we can go through all of them. And
I feel bad even for going past 3. So we could. I feel bad. I should have just been like, no, I just love chatting with you and hearing your wisdom. But maybe we could do another one sometime. But thank you so much for taking the time.
You are so welcome.
Chat for a long time. Would you mind just sharing with our audience how they can find you? Tell them about your podcast.
Oh,
your
sure.
It is so good.
Yes. I do have a podcast. It's called Loving Life at Home. I'd love for you to listen in there. I have a blog by the same name, Loving Life at Home. That's where you'll find a lot of my, where I write about marriage and motherhood and minding the things that matter most, really a lot on faith, and that's where my prayer guides are. That's where my podcast is. I also have a blog called Flanders Family Home Life, and I put lots of printables. There's homeschool help, there's parenting tips, and a lot of book reviews and curriculum, and that sort of thing. Games to play with your kids, travel tips, that kind of.
So many fun. I was looking at it.
And that one. And really, I guess you can connect with me at Instagram, Flanders_family. And then probably the best way to connect with me is email. I do have a subscriber list, and I send out a new newsletter every Wednesday that has a themed link list of resources on, like last week, or this week, I guess it was on Mother's Day. And so different resources for Mother's Day, because it's coming up Sunday. And last week it was on graduation, because graduations. And so all sorts of different resources for graduation. But there's a different themed list for every Wednesday. And then I also include a link to my most recent podcast, and whatever book I'm reading, I usually will review. I read a lot, and so I usually have a choice of books to pick from that I've finished that week, and recipes I share, that sort of thing, and reader requests, because I have a lot of printables, but it seems like there's always somebody that needs a printable that I don't have, and they'll write to me, and I will do my best to fulfill that, and then I share that on the newsletter too. So you can find me at www.flandersfamily.info, info, and there's a subscribe button right at the top that you can sign up if you're interested.
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, I would highly recommend your podcast, and yeah, now I get your emails too. So it's like this is so fun. So you do such good work. I don't know how you find time. Do you sleep? I just
I do. I
okay.
get
You
at
do.
least 7 hours
Oh,
a
good.
night.
That's amazing.
I have not always done that, but about a year and a half ago, I got breast cancer, and so I, and all my research realized that lack of sleep was one of my risk factors, and so I've been very diligent to make sure I get adequate rest,
Good for
at
you.
least 7 hours a night, and then and change my diet too and that sort of thing. So I'm doing great. I feel wonderful, and then also I'm in a different season of life, Hannah. You know, I did not get as many books read or as many crafts done or any of that when all my children were little bitty, and that's okay. You know, you do what you can with the fringe minutes that you have available, and then you just keep being faithful, and eventually you do reap the harvest. Don't grow weary in doing good. In due time
Aw.
you'll reap.
Well, you've definitely not grown weary, and it's fun to see you in a reaping season. So, oh well, thank you, Jennifer, so much.
Well, it was a delight. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye bye.
Bye bye.